camera hovers on the end of a 2-mile cable beneath the Atlantic. It is searching for something amidst some of the coldest, darkest depths of our planet. On the monitor above, nothing but the same monotonous, muddy seafloor. Then something appears. A shape begins to form out of the dark. A missing submarine lies somewhere down there, lost in 1968. And inside it, something far more dangerous. 2 nuclear torpedoes and a reactor still sealed within its hull, resting nearly 10,000 feet below the Atlantic. But why were they left there? And what does this mean today? On 15th of February 1968, the 99-man crew of USS Scorpion had headed out from Virginia for the Mediterranean. Commanded by Francis Slattery, their mission was to observe the Soviet submarines near the Azores. But when they failed to return home, naval commanders knew something had gone catastrophically wrong. USS Scorpion wasn't just another Cold War submarine commanded by the US Navy. It was a deadly war machine. Hidden inside its hull were 14 Mark 37 electric torpedoes, 7 steam-powered Mark 14s, and 2 nuclear-tipped Mark 45 torpedoes. Weapons designed to destroy entire submarines with a nuclear underwater blast. If Scorpion was lost, those weapons would be lost with it. As USS Scorpion completed its mission, it was diverted unexpectedly. A new order had come in. Slattery and his men were told to head 1,000 miles south from the Mediterranean and monitor Soviet activity near the Canary Islands. Days later, the radio crackled into life. USS Scorpion reported it was in hot pursuit of Soviet submarine K-135 and was beginning surveillance. They would report back when they had more information. But that report never came. An eerie radio silence fell over the command center. Attempts to reach Slattery failed. And as families gathered at the docks to welcome their loved ones home, the US Navy held back its biggest secret. They had heard something days before. Not a radio transmission, not a report from nearby allies. Something far more haunting. The US Navy had deployed a top-secret sound surveillance system, or SOSUS, during the Cold War. It consisted of a network of underwater acoustic sensors used to monitor and track submarines and surface vessels. It gave the US Navy an extra pair of eyes. But on May 22nd, the SOSUS hydrophones picked up a terrifying sound. It was a single, muffled boom. And many believe that was the sound of USS Scorpion imploding, or worse, exploding. An underwater boom followed by everlasting radio silence means only one thing. All sailors aboard that vessel were lost, but nothing could be proven. Yet, days after their intended return to port, a chorus of sirens, foghorns and klaxon alarms filled the night sky over the sea in Virginia. A flotilla of vessels set out on a search and rescue mission to bring back the lost submariners. 55 ships and 35 aircraft scoured the sea at Scorpion's last known position. But USS Scorpion had vanished without a trace. As time passed, search vessels dropped off one by one until only a handful remained, driven by the hope of finding their fallen comrades. The last communication with the sub had been in May. It was now October. Research ship USNS Mazar combed a 12-mile radius. A camera was tethered to a 3-mile-long cable and towed behind the ship. Those on deck anxiously stared at the screen, showing what the camera was recording below. As it descended into the depths, daylight faded. The water became murky with darkness until there was no light at all. And yet, the camera continued downwards for 2 miles. engulfed by the icy cold of the deep Atlantic, until it touched something: the sea floor. At 10,000 feet, the camera's light illuminated just a small section of the seafloor at a time, an agonizing inch-by-inch search that returned nothing but mud and rock, fish and crabs, for weeks. Until one day, something large began to emerge from the darkness, protruding from the sea floor. Eerie and sinister, this wasn't anything natural, not a rocky formation or deep-sea mount. This was man-made. The Mizar slowed down as the camera glided gently closer, and that's when they saw it. A piece of metal, bent and twisted, lying on the seabed 9,800 feet below the surface. And then some more. It was a debris field stretching for 1,500 feet, scattered pieces of metal and battery cells lying littered in the silent depths, illuminated only by the searchlight. It was what they had been searching for. And yet, no one felt joy, only a sense of dread. They knew what was coming. Following the trail of destruction, they came across the unmistakable shadow of a hull carved into a sizable trench, like a trowel through the soil. They had found USS Scorpion. And what a sight it was. The bow had skidded on impact, creating the deep trench it now lay in. The sail, the tower that sits on the top surface of the submarine, had been ripped clean off. Part of the hull had disintegrated and was lying on its port side. The submarine was torn in two. The operations compartment had collapsed, and the engine room had shot forwards into the hull. But inside, part of the hull, concealed from view, were two nuclear torpedoes, built for nuclear warfare, and now lying untouched on the ocean floor. The camera slowly and carefully scanned over the wreckage, a nuclear tomb in its final resting place. But there was one devastating finding within the debris field: an intact body. Still wearing their nuclear power coveralls and a life jacket, the crew member lay between major hull sections. Unlike the other personnel, this body hadn't been disintegrated by pressure. But what could have caused this tragedy? The remaining body, along with analysis of the shattered submarine remains, provided a clue as to what had happened. Some believed USS Scorpion was sunk under enemy fire, retaliation for their own loss. Some reported that the underwater boom had been followed by something even more disturbing: a Soviet submarine quickly leaving the area just seconds later. But was this really an attack on USS Scorpion? Or was it something else? Detailed investigations suggested this was a terrible accident rather than an act of war. One plausible explanation suggested excess hydrogen accumulated in the battery compartment whilst charging, and was ignited by a single accidental spark. It exploded, likely killing all personnel in the forward compartments instantaneously. But for those towards the rear, there was a glimmer of hope. These crewmen likely survived the initial blast. They heard the terrifying boom and felt the whole submarine shudder and vibrate. But as they rushed to examine the damage, they realized that they had lost control of the submarine. Unable to keep at periscope depths, the submarine began sinking uncontrollably. Slowly at first, and then faster as gravity pulled it downwards, further from the surface, further from safety. For 22 minutes, USS Scorpion descended into the darkness. It was being carried from a familiar world to one where no humans are supposed to exist. Those on board frantically tried to find a way out, their last moments filled with terror at the inevitable. It seems that for at least one sailor, they made it into the escape trunk, a pressure-resistant compartment designed to let crew exit the vessel while submerged. But it was too late. At those depths, there was no way of making it to the surface. No one knows for sure how that single sailor wasn't crushed along with his crewmates during the implosion. or why his body remained at the wreckage site. It only added to the mystery surrounding USS Scorpion. But those final moments of all 99 men are overshadowed by something lethal that remains. Deep in the wreckage, something stirs. Not alive, but present. The nuclear reactors of USS Scorpion, and alongside them, its nuclear torpedoes, encased in twisted steel, resting below the Atlantic at nearly 10,000 feet, where pressure exceeds anything they were ever designed to withstand. Although no longer operating, they are still deadly. Although hidden from view, experts know the torpedoes are still down there. The torpedo room is still intact. It had not been crushed like the rest of the sub. This room had likely flooded before Scorpion sank, limiting the shock implosions that could have resulted in a nuclear catastrophe. And the reactors had stopped safely too the moment the submarine was lost. A controlled system shut down by design, sealed inside layers of containment that were meant to outlast the vessel itself. But the threat hasn't disappeared. Already saltwater has begun to break down the metal containment bit by bit. Once indestructible seals begin to age under the unforgiving pressure of the deep sea. As though all corners of the world are pressing down on it, enveloped by an icy cold, inhospitable environment. Something that once powered a Cold War hunter-killer submarine now rests in total darkness and silence, beyond reach and beyond repair. And there is no way of bringing it up to safety. It is too deep to surface, too dangerous to try. The cost involved in retrieving the nuclear torpedoes would be monumental. The logistics could prove too challenging. It would be a hazardous rescue mission. Any recovery would mean cutting into a fragile nuclear wreck. One mistake could rupture contaminated sections of the submarine, destabilize the debris field, or scatter radioactive material into the Atlantic. Considering all their options, the US Navy decided to leave USS Scorpion in its final resting place, a nuclear tomb. The reactors and torpedoes are constantly monitored for leakage. The wreck is checked for movement and decay. Radiation levels in the surrounding water are under tight surveillance, and the reactor coolant scrutinized for breaks in its pressure and flow. But the ocean is constantly transforming. Sediment builds up around the wreck. Marine deposits settle on its surface. And what happens if there is a leak? How can nuclear waste be contained almost 2 miles below the surface? What would the fallout be from such a scenario? These questions sit at the back of people's minds. Knowing there is a ticking time bomb beneath the waves and being powerless to stop it. There will come a time when USS Scorpion no longer lies in silence, hidden below the Atlantic. When, decades from now, its legacy re-emerges, a deadly presence like the hunter-killer it was born to be.